Kia ora whānau and kia ora to those that are watching on live stream. Apologies for running over in our last workshop. Today we have Aroha and Brent, as well as Monique, sharing Tiraki, our iwi hapu relationships framework. So, kia ora tātou.
Tēnā koutou ngā kaikaunihira o te rohe nei. Tēnā koe te kurumatua Bernie. Kia koe te pau whakahaere mo tēnei rā nina, tēnā koe. Nō reira, tēnā tātou katoa. So yes, this is part 2 of our iwi hapu induction workshop, the first of which was held last month. But due to the amount of information consumed on the day, it was decided for this part to be rescheduled. You would have seen in the pre-reading a summary of the key messages from each of our presenters on the day. And Tiraki, which was to be part of that, is going to be talked about today, and that's just a recap of Tiraki and next steps. So,
thank you, Aroha. So Aroha's going to take us through a majority of the presentation, but part of my job was to talk a little bit about the why Council even started doing any work on an iwi hapu relationships framework. And it's fair to say that it came from a sense of frustration from elected members about their lack of awareness and understanding about the many arrangements that Council had in play with a number of entities. And those arrangements were causing and still cause tension in the environment where there is a view that those arrangements are inequitable between iwi and hapu, and when Council governance of the day were not aware of those arrangements, and governance of the day, which some of those elected members are in the room, so they're better to speak to than possibly me, when they stood back from that, there was still an environment where there was concern about whether Council were actually delivering, were delivering better in terms of its partnership responsibilities. And so the framework was intended to provide strategic direction where, outside of our community outcome, which talks about partnership with tangata whenua and a small paragraph that goes with it, and then our statutory obligation, which requires a policy called Māori contribution to decision making, Council had no reference point that said, well, why and when and how and who with and what. And so Tiraki was developed to provide that guidance, to then create a platform where Council were able to, in a transparent way, look at how the agreements we had in place could translate back to Tiraki into the future. And I know throughout the presentation we'll get to the agreements at a particular time. But maybe just before Aroha continues, maybe just checking in with elected members who were here at the time, around why you asked for emphasis to be given to the development of an iwi hapu relationship framework. Have I articulated well what your views were at the time?
I can speak to this because I was here. And so there's probably 3 things. So yes, what you've reflected is accurate. There were probably 2 key things, which was that there was a council mark assessment done at the time, and they specifically referenced the lack of or the need to do some work in this space. We also had a very awkward council meeting or workshop or something where a representative from a hapu came along, and they'd read in a public agenda about some money having been paid to that hapu, and they weren't aware of it, and so they were kind of going, I don't get what's happening. And so and then the other piece was that there was I think some growing public sentiment about the side agreements in relation to consenting agreements, and whether just having some clarity over whether what was covered by standing resourcing agreements and what was then covered by the side agreements in terms of those consents, and actually going, what is each agreement covering, and shouldn't this agreement already cover that input, that kind of thing. And there was probably also a practice of them needing to go and get cultural impact assessments as part of capital projects, and there wasn't kind of clear lines of how much we were budgeting for that, what the process was. Again, is it covered by existing resource agreements? So I think that was just some context. We kind of wanted some certainty and a direction and a document that kind of set out some direction around how are we going to navigate entering into these agreements or updating them, and how does it all fit together, I think was the kind of sentiment. Okay.
Okay, so Tiraki is our strategic framework for how we work with iwi and hapu. It's not an operational manual. It's not creating new layers of decision making. It provides clarity and consistency around our approach. It's about being intentional rather than transactional. It clearly sets out the purpose and principles that should guide our behaviour, communication, and decision making. It also anchors us in our statutory obligations. This reflects the legislative environment that we operate within. Tiraki sets the why and the what. The tools and templates sit underneath that provide operational guidance and can evolve over time without reopening the strategic foundation. So just a little bit about the journey. So it's been a 2-year journey. Back in 2023, a project advisory group was formed, made up of a cross-section of councillors, council officers, and representation from each of our iwi partners. We got together and started a series of monthly hui where we developed the content. So we started from scratch altogether. This was going to be a collaboration with our iwi partners, and it was. We would meet monthly, and throughout the time from December 23 through to July 25, we kept council informed through a series of about 6 or 7 workshops during that time. And in August 2025, council adopted what was the iwi hapu relationships framework and is now known as Tiraki. So the 4 parts, the key points of Tiraki, with the strategic goal, which is to shift how the organisation thinks, decides and acts in relation to iwi and hapu, from transactional and compliance driven to intentional, relational and tiriti centred. Purpose and intent, Tiraki helps the organisation act with integrity, intention and respect in all iwi and hapu relationships. Partnership principles that should guide behaviour, decision making and communication is whanaungatanga, which is relationships before transactions. Manakitanga, acting in ways that uphold mana. Kotahitanga, working together towards shared outcomes. Rangatiratanga, respecting authority and autonomy. And kaitiakitanga, protecting and enhancing the well-being of people and place. Then the strategic relationship model. Tiraki sets out how council builds enduring, well-resourced and accountable partnerships with iwi and hapu through tailored agreements, governance relationships and continuous review. And as well as all that, there is operational guidance at the back for kaimahi for our staff, which includes the engagement approach that we've taken, which is from the International Association for Public Participation, which has been adapted for Māori. Includes the Māori engagement spectrum, which we will talk about a little bit more, remuneration matrix. There's an engagement planning checklist, which is just a guide on what our staff can think about before they even enter into the actual engagement part of it, but all the pre-planning and things that they need to do. RMA and statutory guidance, overlapping areas of interest, which we will also talk about a little bit more, partnership and resourcing templates, and strategic alignment and implementation tools. Next steps. Operationalising Tiraki. So Tiraki is not meant to sit with one role, one team, or one part of the organisation. When it does, it becomes fragile. So in terms of what it means for the organisation, we'll be creating a process where we weave Tiraki across the organisation so that it stands strong over time. So what this means for elected members, so providing clear strategic direction for how council builds and maintains partnerships with iwi and hapu. It provides a consistent and principle-based approach to partnership and resourcing arrangements, reporting on partnership performance and ensuring alignment with council's broader strategic priorities, exercising governance in a way that reflects council's legislative responsibilities and local context. What it is not is elected members retain statutory decision-making authority. Any changes to resourcing arrangements will be brought back through formal decision processes. Tiraki is an organisation-wide framework that informs how we all work. So according to one of our iwi leaders here in Horowhenua, it's the second most issue with overlapping areas in the country. Tiraki recognises that interest across iwi, hapu and council will at times overlap geographically, culturally and strategically. Tiraki does not attempt to define or rank mana, and it provides a structured way for council to engage respectfully and consistently where interests overlap.
Yeah, I think council is at a practical level well versed in this overlapping layers of interest space, and it's probably what I want to emphasise is that just because we have Tiraki does not mean that the challenges of our operating environment is easier. There's a whole lot of things that drive the tension in that overlapping layers of interest, but what Tiraki acknowledges is that it's not for council to determine who has mana, and that legally council is not able to choose. And depending on what act we're operating under, whether it be the Local Government Act or the Resource Management Act, depends at what level we engage at. And I think we could anticipate that Tiraki will need to be updated in an environment where the Resource Management Act system changes and puts more emphasis on iwi engagement as opposed to hapu engagement. I think the other thing that I just acknowledge in this around overlapping areas of interest is that there can be views amongst iwi and hapu that we shouldn't be talking to other iwi and hapu. And it is well debated in the courts and in case law that council is not the position of authority. We are not the Waitangi Tribunal, but that can create an additional level of tension in our relationships when we are seen to respectfully and consistently engage with all.
Can I just ask something here? Because this does seem to be quite a risk and challenging area here, where we can fail to meet expectations on both sides of the ledger, in that an act or an omission can be interpreted as signalling or giving weight to one iwi more than the other. But there's also another overlay to this, which presumably is about property rights. So take like Horowhenua is a good example where there might be overlapping areas of interest, but ultimately there's a stronger relationship with landowners, and you know what I mean. Like there's kind of these things, and never. It's not just simple like there's overlapping interests between iwi. There's an overlay where we have to take into account the rights and expectations of landowners or other people who might be directly affected by particular proposals, and so it just feel like, is that correct? That like this is just purely about looking at it through from a lens of kind of RMA, but actually there's far more nuance to this depending on what the issue is.
Yes. Acknowledging that Tiraki, the scope of Tiraki was about iwi hapu relationships. It didn't go into the territory of, so an example being, if we use a really practical example around our discharge of wastewater in Levin to the pot, and council has worked with 2 iwi partners, but there is, in addition to the iwi partnership lens through that work, Moepuko Lands Trust owns some land associated with the pot, and so Tiraki doesn't speak to that. It acknowledges that there are instances where iwi might, or people might own land that and wear multiple hats, but and I think Lake Horowhenua is also an example of that because that's privately owned.
So the Māori engagement spectrum is the approach that we use going forward. It uses the core values for developing and implementing public participation processes which are aimed at helping inform better decisions that reflect the interests and concerns of affected people, and has been adapted for iwi hapu. So that's just an example up there. I don't know how you can read. So we start from inform, engage, involve, collaborate, up to empower. So Council currently has several agreements that support and recognise iwi and hapu partners, and these agreements were created at different times and vary in their expiry dates, renewal terms and funding levels. While these agreements have served an important purpose, they vary significantly in form, funding, duration and clarity. The result is a patchwork of arrangements that are not always equitable or easy to maintain. So I have handed out a sheet to everyone, so you should have it in front of you. Due to this being an open forum, it's not up on the screen. But any questions that you have in regards to the funding pool as a whole, I'm happy to answer, but anything to do with any of the individual agreements would need to be taken into public excluded.
Sorry, can I, just in terms of these arrangements, a lot of them are to do with infrastructure or RMA type work. These some of them are operational rather than governance agreements, though, aren't they?
These are capacity capability agreements.
Right. So do any of them novate with Three Waters?
That's a question mark, particularly I think if there is one, it's the lake.
Right.
Our partnership agreement with the Lake Trust.
But even the navigator role with Tumanukau?
Just maybe we're in a public
okay.
workshop. We're happy to go public excluded. We just I think that's got to be a lead from the table, and then you can make the call through Nina to go into public excluded for workshop. Would you?
Yeah, and I'll keep my comments general because that was going to be building on what Bertie said. Is I think this is going to be the interesting thing is to just navigate, because I would imagine that some of these capacity and resourcing agreements currently contemplate some of the engagement and participation engagement that we have around waters related projects and infrastructure and operational decisions, and so there's a kind of a question mark for me around how do we navigate that as we start to re-look at some of these? Do we let CDW in that process kind of lead part of this, and then we do a kind of an assessment of what's left, or what does the remaining engagement look like? I shouldn't. So that would be quite useful to have a conversation around that. Like, how do we see the process unfolding?
Yeah, so Aroha and Brent are going to talk shortly about because it was always intended that the framework would then signal the review of agreements and for council to agree on an approach they want to take. So we'll talk about that soon, but I think Councillor Mason.
Oh, I was just checking how much of these fit into that stranded overhead component of Three Waters. Was that included? And no, okay.
These agreements are funded out of the governance and leadership activity. These agreements, most of which were signed in about 2017, 2018, were not budgeted for, and it was in the 2023 long-term plan we put a budget line. So
Just on that, so yeah, with the adoption of Tiraki, Council now has a strategic and policy level foundation for partnership that clearly defines expectations, principles, and practical tools for engagement. So over the coming months, we'll bring to you a set of options for consideration to transition the partnership agreements from their current state to a more clear, transparent, and unified partnership model. Anything more on that? Yeah, so the iwi hapu induction workshop was about strengthening elected members' understanding of council's relationships with mana whenua and to support confident, informed governance that reflects both statutory obligations and local context. So next steps for continued engagement is advice on the implications of reforms for future partnership frameworks and resourcing settings, including options and modelling to inform initial direction and formal decisions, to hear from elected members further on partnership aspirations and expectations, and to provide advice on potential operating models supported by preliminary analysis of implications and resource considerations as aligned with Tiraki, and there's marae marae visits program planning underway as we speak. Was there any more on that one that you want to? No. And now, let's hear from you. What do you need from us? What information do you need to give guidance? And how do you see your role as elected members in maintaining relationships with iwi and hapu partners?
Kia ora tātou. Thank you for that presentation. Probably just reflecting on some of the comments made around the remuneration that we obviously haven't shared online for those of you that are online. It's not that we're keeping it from you, it's just that it's an agreement that's private, and unless we have an ability to share, we cannot share it, similar to any other contract that we may have. For me, is continuing the mahi that you guys started, wanting to acknowledge the elected members that were involved, the kaimahi that were involved in getting us to where we are today. Reminding everyone that this is a step in the right direction so that we have a guiding documentation that helps us to navigate iwi hapu relationships. It's not meant to be the answer for every way that we may work with our iwi hapu partners, but certainly a way where we maintain each other's mana in doing so. So for myself, working forward is how can we help to strengthen this engagement with our iwi partners and hapu partners is really important, but understanding how do we find that balance and understanding so we can work in a better space for our community. Kia ora.
Just building on what Nina says, and my comments actually aren't a response to Nina because I was already thinking it, but it'll come across that way, is that I think that's one of the things that I've observed over the years is that there can be a tension between the expectation of partners to keep kind of dollar figures confidential, that that there's perhaps the way in which council views accountability mechanisms can sometimes not be aligned with where partners see that going, and obviously we've got an overlay of Lagoima, and so the question really is, acknowledging that we are dealing with ratepayer money, how do we navigate that tension? Because I think there is sometimes differing views from the partner side of the equation, and the context in which council operates, and so obviously we want to be respectful and where possible try and accommodate some of those aspirations, but there's a pragmatism, or there's a kind of a legal council context that also has to be considered, and so it might be a bit unfair to put this on you today, but like how are we going to navigate that tension as we come into renewing some of these agreements? You want to park it? That's fine. If it's
I possibly would just want to come back to the Lagoima bit, and then maybe we'll come back to the tension piece. But I think, just for clarity, we've absolutely released at times the value of agreements at an individual level, and the rationale for not putting it up on the screen today is because some of the specifics, without naming one or two, have particular nuance to it where we would absolutely be breaching privacy. So it's more a privacy concern why we're just focusing on the pool today, and we were trying to manage that tension around ensuring that our workshops were open to the public. So it's not intended to kind of not allow you to ask hard questions, and we can go into public exploited if needed. In terms of the transition to whatever our future fit agreements look like, that is going to require ultimately direction from council, but this is where I think I would encourage elected members to think about what role they play in the relationships with iwi hapu, because it will be our job to operationalise those decisions, but iwi and hapu look to our elected members for the relationship. So what I mean by that is, I don't think it would be helpful for elected members to say, go away and slice it in half, Monique, and let us know how you get on. It's actually elected members being part of that conversation with iwi and hapu.
Yeah, can I just respond to that? Because and then the other sort of turn is because there is two pieces to that, which is, so you ask the question, what do you need from us? I would kind of like to understand at the moment, in terms of the resourcing agreements, kind of what percentage of the value add or the energy or the engagement and the capacity building relates to Water's kind of project activity versus all the other stuff, just to get a sense of kind of, and it doesn't need to be an exact percentage split, but I don't actually even have any context. Is it 10%? Is it 50%? Is it what? Because the question then shifts to what is the, like, if we're providing resourcing to support capacity and ultimately save money because we have a good process where we're getting insight and engagement, how do we actually, and we've done it through the framework, how do we value that feedback? But the test is going to be how we quantify it, because we've kind of put a value on what we get back and how it works, but how do we actually quantify what we need or what we would like or what we would expect? Like, that sounds really kind of a bit blunt and brutal, but but there's two parties to the transaction, and so we've kind of put a value on time and effort and energy, but now we need to quantify what does the actual engagement look like.
And we can, I think, in some of the early option work I've seen Aroha frame up, like, I think we can think about how we provide some advice to council around that. And I think we've got to balance that with the view of council as opposed to the view of the partner. And I think there's three things that I'm mindful of is, one, our legislative environment is changing, and what we know now about waters and RMA, like what that looks like in 3 years' time, I'm not sure. But also our two of our iwi been unsettled, and I think when you go to the intent and substance of those two agreements, it was acknowledgement about them being unsettled and the important role they played in providing voice to council's decision making. And so what does that look like in a settlement environment? But if you look back at the work over the last 10 years, a lot of the energy has gone into waters, because that has been, a big part of council's mahi. It's what that looks like in a post Three Waters environment, particularly in the context of the conversation we just had about statement of expectations. Council's we're gonna have to unpick through that.
Because I guess that's my question, is how do we preserve the relationships that we've been building up when essentially that work around waters, and speaking of waters in Te Manawatū in terms of Horowhenua, that now kind of sits with the Tapuai Aho, as opposed to, like that's separate to council, so when we won't be working with iwi partners on those matters now. Yeah.
Or central districts, central districts water responsibility, so it would, this is a very blunt thing to say, but we know that it will be illegal in a couple of years' time for council to be rating for the delivery of water services. We're transferring those assets and that responsibility to Central District's water. So for council to hold an agreement where we are funding work associated with waters, that's not appropriate. That will be the role and responsibility of Central District's water. But in a post Three Waters environment, council will still need to have a relationship and partnership with iwi, but the shape of that will look very different, just like the shape of our future looks different if you think about some of the conversations we had earlier today.
I know, and so that was just my question, much like we spoke, we've talked today about the importance of really engaging with the community around understanding things like a rates capping environment, etc., was ensuring that we are having these conversations upfront and early with people we've got resourcing agreements with, but also people who have an understanding of Tiraki and how we work together, but what that's about now with not being a water delivery service.
The briefing notes talk a lot of, the theme is that our iwi Hapi partners are looking for a partnership of trust, and I'm trying to understand what that looks like actually from a governance level, and probably need some guidance and advice in terms of how that actually what that actually looks like. I can see, our agreements are, to me, very operational and capacity focused, and what I want to understand is at a governance level, what does a partnership of trust look like?
Yeah, and I think as officers we can give advice about the mechanisms that you could use to have those conversations, but really that is elected members having a direct relationship with iwi hapu. That's about governance to governance, which we started in the induction and having our iwi.
Kia ora, thank you. Outside of the treaty and the Local Government Act, it's quite an open-ended question in terms of how each elected member views their relationship with iwi and hapu. And that's going to, that's going to be a great conversation that we can all have to find that middle ground and where we want to go to. But talking from an individual, personal elected member view, obviously from a bicultural and a multicultural perspective, for me, the relationship with iwi hapu is very, very important. And I don't want that to be on a superficial level. And because of the complexities that we have within our region, I've now gone out to start to approach different iwi and hapu to sit down and have personal conversations with them just to see, where they're at, what they want, what they're hoping for, how they see the relationship. And that's something I would appreciate support with, because while I might ask, hey, what's the phone number and who do I speak to about this, that would be really helpful just to be able to say, well, look, these are the people that, and the communities to speak to, and, I can help you set that up or be able to go out to chat to them. Because for me personally, outside of the table, I need to have that hands-on, direct approach so that I understand more fully and I know where I'm coming, where everyone's coming from.
I think that would be a good conversation for you to have as elected members around, as individuals. I think it's great if you've got that desire to form those individual relationships. But in terms of the organisation providing support for those relationships, we really need to take your lead around how you collectively want that to be done. And I think one of the opportunities that exists is to really strengthen the cadence of engagement at a governance level. I meet with the majority of our iwi partners on a monthly basis. I think it will be important for you all to be on the same page about how are you collectively, the governance table, whether that's one of you, three of you, seven of you, all of you, are having that kānui ki te kānui engagement with our partners in a way that reflects the Tiraki framework, but also reflects the really hard decisions that you've got ahead of you in a future fit roadmap.
Sort of align and I guess echo those thoughts, because Katrina, with all due respect, the power comes from the iwi view of the collective of council, and that won't come from what they feel about one certain councillor or another. And I think we've got to build those relationships. I think the marae visits, so that we as councillors don't feel like manuhere when we go on to a marae, whether it's in a council sense or in a wider community sense, I think would be really powerful. Having seen some of the photos and images that are on some of our local marae, where in the past council have been to place, and how valued that those moments and those interactions were valued by iwi, will help strengthen our relationships. And within the structure, it does talk about the aspiration of it being a governance level interaction. So, I think we heard from Shane, who was very keen at getting those regular meetings re-established. And I think for us, what success would look like is not that we can pick up a telephone and have a conversation with Shane or with Di, but actually there could be a number of members from within each of those hapus that we could arrange to meet and have a conversation and get a viewpoint and get their feedback. When we can reach beyond just the operational side or the CE version, is where we'll see where we're getting that depth of understanding that will help inform how we shape those relationships moving forward, and hopefully then in time strengthen those.
Kia ora. Tēnei te mihi atu ki a koe te tohine me tēnei kiriata me ki, me tēnei kōrero o pāna ki te kaunihera kia mahi tahi ai tātou. A ngai Māori ara ko te kaunihira hoki. Tēnei hoki te mihi ki ngā tangata e mātakitaki mai tēnei wā, tēnā koutou katoa. I've just got some notes here. Communication is vital. Kanohi ki te kanohi is better. Our whānau, our hapu, our iwi, our people love kanohi ki te kanohi because you can hear and feel all the senses. You can, if you're reading an email, you can't really get the gist of what their heart is saying. So I've got some ideas on how we can better engage and maintain the relationships that we have with our whānau hapu iwi, including those who might not be mana whenua in this rohe, mā tā waka, that includes everybody. So attending, I think when the first workshop that we had, I had asked, Tumata Kahuki, Shane Royal, I had asked him how do they communicate, or how does this information filter down to the hapu level, which is the people. His response was working on it. It's very difficult. And so if you're not engaging, if that information's not filtering down to the people, to the hapu level, we can, sometimes you're making decisions without the people. You're making decisions based on what you already know. In these places, there's representatives of all these hapu. I noticed that there's 12 out of 13 hapu that are under the korowai of Tumata Kahuki, which is Raukawa. And then you have, of course, Moepoko, as well, the two mana whenua within this rohe. Kanohi ki te kanohi. So marae visits, I remembered saying that if we want a respectful, meaningful relationships with our people, with whānau hapu iwi, we go to them. Don't expect us to sit here in the chambers wanting our whānau to come here, because it's a foreign place for them to feel comfortable. But the more and more they visit the chambers, they will feel more comfortable. Just like what Clint was talking about, the more opportunities we get as elected members of the council to go and visit marae, we will no longer feel like manuhiri or visitors. We will feel like part of the home crowd, or the hau kainga. So I think that's a very important thing, that we speed up that process maybe for the marae visits. I'm not sure when that's supposed to be programmed in to do that, but the faster the better. Another thing I've noticed is, which is all part of that, cultural competencies. Cultural competency training within the council, so that te ao Māori, or everything the Māori culture does, is not, I don't want to say tokenism, not the right word, so it's practiced regularly, so it becomes normal. We want to normalise not just te reo Māori, but the way we do things, tikanga, kawa, all those things. For instance, we know here at this council, when there's manuhiri, we're going to have a mihi whakatau, which is an informal pōwhiri process, so that we don't, and I'm going to refer to it, so that we don't unknowingly breach tikanga that we should already know. And there was a pōwhiri last week that many of us witnessed, and that was in tikanga from Māori perspective, that was dealt to. So as Horowhenua District Council, I would be mortified for that to happen to us. So I'm just suggesting maybe cultural competencies, things like don't sit your bum on the table, there's whokai, You know, simple things, but you can actually, because if we don't practice them here and we go outside the council building to the marae, wherever, and you don't follow those tikanga, you're going to get a growling. So from the nannies or anybody else, that should be our job, or our responsibility, particularly as kaimahi in the council, like Aroha and Riki, as well as Nina and I as the Māori Ward councillors in the space, to help and support our co-councillors, elected members, so that we observe and adhere to tikanga, and we know it off by heart, so that we don't have to guess, or we don't have to feel uncomfortable in those situations, because it's really not scary when you dive in. I guess dive in and experience it. It's quite beautiful, and our whānau, I think they'll be open to that.
Councillor Keto, could I just give you that assurance that internally, so at an operational level, through what's called Tūhono, which is our cultural toolkit, our kaimahi have access to that work, and there's been an incredible amount of work being led by our cultural outcomes team. I just want to check, are you talking about the role of elected members and engaging in that mahi?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's a conversation for elected members to have, and absolutely if elected members are eager to engage, then our team could work with you to ensure that those opportunities for capacity and capability growth are there.
Also, I know that you've got these iwi hapu. As Māori Ward councillor, I'm wanting to connect, Nina and I, wanting to connect with the iwi partners, not just when they come here and they turn up here and presenting, but how can we meet with them regularly, just to get so we can guide or help or see what they need, or just be more proactive, I guess, in that space.
As I should, as an elected member, because I represent everybody, not just one, and that's my responsibility that I take on in going out to speak to all of our different communities. But it would be great to be able to have that regular connection, because if there's nothing there, I will go and find it.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is a desire to have organised opportunities for elected members to engage at place, and that is underway in terms of the marae visit program. But in addition to that, what that regular cadence of governance to governance might look like. Yeah, noted. We'll work on it.
I just wanted to let our whānau know out there that might be watching online that in our initial iwi hapu workshop that we did, that actually all of the members in chambers stood. We did a bit of a mihi whakatau to our iwi partners when they came in. And that morning we learnt the waiata from our waiata group here at Horowhenua District Council. We all sang. Different elected members took part in leading that waiata. So while there is still work to do, we have in our initial iwi hapu workshop, we did show that we were open and willing and prepared to give it a go, and it was really heartfelt by our iwi partners that did attend that day, especially for Ngāti Tūkurehe, as the waiata was written by a whanaunga down there. So while we still need to continue working on this, and I'm wholeheartedly assured that we're in very capable hands to ensure that this happens, look forward to the marae meetings, but our councillors, did show that they were able to stand at a moment's notice after learning the waiata and welcome our visitors in that day. So while, as I said, while there's some way to go, we've shown that we have the ability and capability of doing that. So kia ora. So, aroha mai, any more pātai? Okay, so that's us. Again, thank you very much to Aroha, Brent and Monique for your presentation today. Again, apologies for everyone online for our tardiness. We're now going to go into our next workshop.
Yeah, so I think we'll give you a break so that you can get ready for. You're going into public excluded, and we're giving you a fuel supply briefing. We are going to push the animal control workshop to another time because we're conscious of we're over time. And the fuel supply briefing is important given some of the steer we're going to need from